you have been holding Ethereum recently, you have felt it. The market has been bleeding, sentiment is low, and every small bounce gets sold off. And right now there's one question a lot of people are asking. How low could Ethereum actually go, and when can we start to see signs of a bottom? The real opportunities in crypto are created in times exactly like this. So in today's video we are going to break it down both logically and calmly, using history, market structure, and key data to answer one thing. What is a realistic bottom range for Ethereum, and what signals should we be watching to know when it's close? Now, this is not about making crazy predictions or calling exact bottoms, because nobody does that consistently. This is about understanding probabilities so you can make smarter moves in a market driven by emotions. Because the people who win in long-term crypto are not the ones who are perfectly timing the bottoms. They are the ones that position themselves before the next bull market begins. Let's start with something we have talked about before, the regression band. Right now Ethereum is sitting well inside the lower band, and historically that has not been a fast moving phase of the market. When Ethereum trades in this range, it usually means one thing: we are in a good environment to accumulate. This is a phase where hype is gone, volatility slows down, and price grinds sideways or slightly down for an extended period. If we compare to previous cycles, it is very likely that Ethereum can spend a big part of 2026 in this lower regression band. Now that's not exciting, but from an investor's perspective, this is a good time to build long-term positions. So the key question becomes, how deep into this band could Ethereum go before a bottom is formed? To answer that, we need to look at what happened before. If we go back to the 2019-2020 cycle, right before the last major bull run, Ethereum formed a very clear double bottom structure. And this pattern is important because it shows how Ethereum typically behave at major turning points. Back then we saw first bottom when Ethereum initially entered the regression band, a relief rally where people thought the bottom was in, a second bottom around the same range, and then the beginning of a powerful uptrend. Now, if we map out a similar structure to today's market, for Ethereum to create a double bottom, we will likely need to revisit levels close to the April 2025 lows, which would place Ethereum roughly in the $1,400 region. Now, of course, this is not guaranteed, and what makes this interesting is that we are seeing similar signals on other charts. Now let's overlay the ETH divided with Bitcoin chart on the weekly time frame. This chart shows Ethereum relative strength to Bitcoin, basically if Ethereum is outperforming Bitcoin. Back in 2019 to 2020, we saw something very clear. ETH divided Bitcoin formed a double bottom. The first low aligned with entering the regression band, the second low aligned with the broader market bottom. And after that, Ethereum went on to massively outperform Bitcoin during the bull market. Now let's look at today. We are once again seeing a similar structure forming. The first bottom already formed when Ethereum first went into the regression band. The second bottom is still ahead of us. And if that second bottom forms and holds, that could set up a huge bull market for Ethereum once it forms. Historically, moves after this double bottom has taken Ethereum to the top of this regression band, which is where these euphoria phases tend to happen and top out. And that could mean Ethereum could go over $10,000 if we went into the top of this regression band. Now let's add another layer of confluence: Ethereum dominance. This chart shows Ethereum's share of the crypto market. And when we look at this on the weekly time frame, we see that cycle bottoms consistently form with a specific range. Right now, Ethereum dominance is still above those historical bottom zones, which means there is still room to the downside before we reach levels that have previously marked long-term lows. And once again, these levels line up very close with the price region we talked about earlier. A little over 30% move down, which would align with the $1,400 zone. So now we have regression band, ETH divided with Bitcoin structure, Ethereum dominance levels, all pointing towards a similar potential bottom area. That's what we call confluence and where the big long-term opportunities are. Now let's stay on Ethereum dominance, but instead of looking at the weekly time frame, let's look at the daily time frame. Because here we see something important: a descending channel. And what that tells us is this: the market is in a slow, controlled downtrend. This type of structure usually leads to slow bleeding price action, short relief rallies, and gradual lower lows over time. In other words, this is the phase that tests your patience, because there is likely not gonna be anything exciting happening, but the opportunity that is slowly building. So what am I personally doing in a market like this? Because predicting is one thing, but positioning is what actually matters. I use a system of buy zones similar to what I do for Bitcoin, and right now Ethereum is already inside what I define as a cheap zone, and in this zone I basically allow myself to DCA a bit more than I normally would, and if we move lower into the very cheap zones, closer to historical bottoms, then I increase my accumulation even more. Because when you zoom out and think in the long term, buying Ethereum at these prices in a few years can look incredibly cheap. Another simple tool I use is the 50-day moving average on the daily time frame, and it's really not that complicated. Basically, when we are above it, I have a bullish bias, and when we are below it, I have a bearish bias. Right now, Ethereum is still trading below this level, so the trend hasn't flipped. And until I see a break above it with some strong confirmation, like a few candle closes, I'm gonna accept that price is likely gonna go lower. In terms of timing of a low for Ethereum, my case here is pretty much the same as for Bitcoin, which I think is gonna have a low sometime between June and October. So that would be the same thing I'm thinking for Ethereum, since Ethereum tends to follow what Bitcoin does. So again, a realistic bottom for me is sometime between June and October for Ethereum. And if you want to know why I think the bottom is going to be around there, I have other videos about that on my channel. And if this timeline plays out, it would align really well with the double bottom pattern we talked about earlier. So again, how low could Ethereum go? Based on history, structure, confluence across multiple charts, a realistic bottom for me is somewhere around $1,400, which is similar to what we saw in 2025 in April. Not guaranteed, but I think it's possible. And even more importantly, it's times like this where it's boring, slow, nothing is really happening, that the biggest opportunities are created in the long term. Because the next bull market doesn't start when everything looks bullish, it starts when most people have already lost interest. If you enjoyed this video, remember to like and subscribe. Comment down below what I can do better. I love to hear from you guys. And remember, the market doesn't reward those who predict perfectly. It rewards those who prepare while everyone else hesitates. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.